While there has been some debate on the significance of narrative in games, the ludology versus narratology debate, a story can be highly relevant for creating your gameplay and will give your formal game elements necessary meaning. Where gameplay is all about interactivity, narrative is about predestination. It is obvious that narrative can be found in the medium of games, whether it is a story that helps us make sense of the game or a story told by the game. Hi, I am Harsh, and in this video we will talk about types of narratives in game design. But before we talk about types of narratives or its structures, let's look into components of a narrative. Situation. Stories revolve around changing states, like going from an initial state towards a sequence of changing states, which are representative of the events that drive a story. Form. Stories provide common anchors in them, which allows us to process them using patterns and repetitions. Every aspect of a story and a theme can have patterns and repetitions to it. Character. In stories, we like to personify events to make them relevant to us. The character of a story is created out of science, and this can be different from personas in stories. Let's take a game of chess as an example. The representation of playing pieces and board is a stylized depiction of war. There is a highly patterned structure to chess as well, because both time and space are well defined. Time is structured in game turns and space along the grid of the checkerboard. In this sense, this definition of a narrative is very inclusive. Events, action patterns, and characters are all around us. They help us understand the quality of a story, whereas the experience might need a different description to fully understand and grasp. Now, there are two observations that we can make about how stories are told in games. In general, we can understand stories in games along with these two structures. Embedded narrative. The game can feature an interactive narrative where the story is told to the player. Embedded narrative elements are used to create the story. It refers to those scripted narrative elements that are embedded throughout a game to form the background story. That is the pre-generative narrative that is a part of the game before the player interacts with the story. The premise of Mario searching for the Princess Peach or Link time traveling in Hyrule are both examples of embedded narrative that either preceded the player entering the game or are revealed as they play. A number of games that are heavily in embedded narrative rely on cutscenes, short unplayable movie-like clips that develop the story in a cinematic style. Emergent narrative. The game can feature an emergent experience where the story is told by the gameplay that players engage in. Emergent story elements are created during play and arise from the activity within the game system. Basically, emergent narrative differs from embedded narrative in that it arises from the interactions the player has within the game. Each decision the player makes influences the way the story develops. Research conducted on interactive storytelling defines emergent narrative as the construction of systems in which users actively participate in the narrative process in a highly flexible real-time environment where authorial activities are minimized. Games like Fallout 4 allow the player to choose their own storyline, siding with various factions and allowing for a few different outcomes. This narrative is multidimensional as it encompasses space, time, narrative surface, user role, and the nature of narrative controls, making the writing incredibly complex and rich. For games that do follow a narrative, there are many different types, and some games are even a combinations of different types of narratives. What are those types, and how many types are there? Well, here are two main types of narratives. Linear narrative. It is a story progression that follows a very specific forward motion set of events that doesn't allow the player to track back, skip ahead, or influence the storyline at all. Like in Super Mario Bros., the gameplay cannot be influenced by the story because there is only one story, that is, to save the princess. Branching narrative. It is a more complicated type of narrative which is central to the player's choices. meaning this narrative type allows the player to control the progression of the plot and changes the ending depending on their choices. A good example for this would be Undertale, a game about a child who falls into an underground world inhabited by monsters. But most of these monsters do not wish to hurt the child, they just want to be loved and understood. The gameplay of this game changes as per the player's choices and affect the player's journey and the game's ending. Now, if we mix and tweak the above types, we can get more types of narratives, like String of Pearls narrative, where gameplay has a general linear progression but can be influenced by the player. This style includes a level of interactivity that gives the player the freedom to choose different missions or side quests. Or the amusement park model, which is similar to the branching model and is a common strategy for open world games. It allows the player to control the story through interaction, but rather than completing missions or side quests, the player finds these branches through interacting with NPC that is attached to that particular storyline. An example for this is the popular game series Assassin's Creed and Skyrim. The more we tweak the combinations of linear and non-linear narrative, the more types of narratives we can get. But it's important to understand that although narratives are prominent in video games, not every game has a narrative. Simply, not every fun game needs to have a narrative. The act of playing the game for what it is enough. Although, in games which uses narrative, it's important to understand how it can affect the gameplay for maximum outcome as everything contributes to the narrative, whether it's intro screen, framing, interactions, or cutscenes. If you enjoyed the video, please do like and subscribe. With that said, all links are provided in the description. That's it for now, and thank you for watching.